Hello, my name is Wendy McIntyre. I'm a professor at the University of Redlands in environmental studies. And I have a wonderful guest with us today, Faith Winter. She was a 2002 graduate of the University of Redlands, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But she's currently a state senator from Colorado and has been in elected office since 2007. So she's been there a while and is doing marvelous things with climate change, justice for women and others. And it's great to have her. So welcome, Faith.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Good. Well, this is going to be very casual. I have some questions, and mostly we want to hear you talk and not me talk. So I think we overlapped by maybe just a year at the university. I came in 2001 and you graduated in 2002. So
yep.
We can start off at the beginning. So tell us what led to your current occupation and just kind of a timeline from when you left Redlands, or you can even start back when you were at Redlands if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a state senator now, been elected for 14 years, which means I'm one of those career politicians, which we can talk about later. But I went to the University of Redlands and majored in environmental management and minored in biology, essentially because I wanted to save the world. And a couple of things happened throughout my experience at Redlands that really changed my trajectory. And the first was I worked really hard on my thesis, and I know your thesis is really important. But I wrote my thesis on how to save the Endangered Species Act and make sure that the Endangered Species Act actually worked and worked with the economy. Because back then, when we had an environmental management major, it was a lot of business classes, economic classes, as well as environmental science. And so I merged those together, and I did a lot of work, but it then got turned in. I think I won an award, and it didn't do anything because there was no policy behind it. There was no political momentum. At the same time, job was at Inland Temporary Homes, which is a homeless shelter just close to Redlands. And my job was to help single moms find a place to live mostly. And you could stay at the shelter for 3 months, and you had to have income and be drug-free. And so I would go from landlord to landlord in apartment complex in San Bernardino County in Redlands, talking about how these women would be responsible, they'd pay their rent on time, they'd be good community members. And I just heard no over and over and over again. And one time, one of my very favorite clients, her time was up. I had failed in finding her a place to live. She put all of her in 2 trash bags. Her 3-year-old son rode in the back of my car, and I dropped her off at Walmart where she worked, the Redlands Walmart. Her son hid in the dressing rooms that day while she worked, and I don't know where they slept that night because I couldn't find them a place to live. And those 2 experiences really taught me that I can be really good at academics. I can be very invested in service work, but I wanted to go do systemic change. I wanted to change the actual system. I wanted to change the system on why the Endangered Species Act wasn't working. I wanted to change the system on why my clients couldn't find a place to live. And so after Redlands, I became a community organizer. And I found a great organization called Green Corps, which is designed for community organizers to go their year after college to learn how to become a community organizer. And so even though I've had a lot of different titles, I've been a state senator, state representative, mayor pro-tem. I've also worked in nonprofit spaces and been executive directors. I consider my job to be community organizing, to build power through people, to bring people together to take collective action, and oftentimes take collective action to protect the environment. And that's really where I brought what I learned at Redlands together with my organizing training and figured out how to make a difference.
Wow, that's wonderful. I mean, you've gone on to do such great things. I'm really so impressed. tell us a little bit about the White House project. You were involved in that.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about being elected is that actually, unless you're probably at the federal level or in a really big city, you have other jobs. We don't actually pay our elected officials in the country. Most school board members across the country work for free. City councilors usually work for about $1,000 a month. Your state legislatures vary, but really only Michigan, Florida, and California are full-time jobs. The rest of the states are part-time jobs. So I make $30,000 as a state legislator, which means I work in addition to being elected. And mostly what I've done is I've gone back and forth between environmental nonprofits and women's nonprofits. So I started my career working at EnviroCitizen, which encouraged young people to vote based on their environmental values. And I organized people on Colorado college campuses to vote for the environment. Next, I went to the White House Project, which trains women to run for office. And I've trained thousands of women all over the country, first at the White House Project. And then I was the founding executive director of Emerge Colorado, which you all have Emerge California. Emerge is in 25 states, and they train Democratic candidates to run for office and win. And now I'm the training director for VoteRunLead, which is a national online nonpartisan organization that trains women to run for office and win. And through that work, the reason I did that work is the reason I originally ran for office is when I was bringing college students to lobby the Colorado legislature on clean energy, I met this woman who was a rock star in my mind. She was the first woman Senate president in Colorado. Her name was Joan Fitzgerald. And she was just smart and incredibly passionate and working to make a difference every day. And one time I asked her why she was so good at the job she did. And she said, well, we're only as good as the team we have, and we need better people to run for office, and you should run. And I was 25 years old. And now that I've spent the past since 2005 recruiting people to run for office, I know that women have to be invited. Someone has to validate us. Someone has to say, I believe in your leadership. I see you working really hard, and you should be in the seats of power. And Joan issued my invitation for me. And so I've turned around and spent my career trying to issue that invitation to thousands of women all over the country, letting them know that they should run as they are, that they have the experience that they need. They have the passion they need. They have the knowledge they need, and their communities, their states need them right now.
That's wonderful. Wow. Yeah, we do have Emerge in California. And I was wondering if you happen to know Denise Davis.
I do know Denise.
Yeah, okay.
She's fantastic. So Denise on the Redlands City Council. I believe that I know her through Emerge, but I also believe she went through VoteRunLead. And so I'm pretty sure I trained her, or she at least participated in a training program I was involved in at some point. And so we're Facebook friends, and I really appreciate all the work she does.
Yeah, she's great. She's a dynamo. The last time I saw her was on State Street downtown, and she had a mask on that said vote, and I loved it. I want one of those.
I have the same mask.
Okay. Yeah, birds of a feather, I guess, you and Denise. Yep. Yeah, she's, of course, also a Redlands grad and just doing great things here.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the climate change work you've done.
Yeah, so climate change, I mean, I worked on it when I was at Redlands. We were working at Redlands City Council through some of my work I did in class to take more action on climate change. And it was just always something that I knew was really urgent. And just this week in Colorado, in my city, it was raining ash because of all of our forest fires. I know California has a ton of forest fires. Basically, the entire west of our country is on fire right now. And the urgency of action is now. I've done a lot. The most recently is I passed House Bill 1261 last session, which brings Colorado even further beyond the Paris agreements. And so it requires that we reduce our carbon output across sector. And that's really important because we've taken a lot of action within the energy sector in California and Colorado and across the country on closing down coal-fired power plants, on increasing renewable energy, on increasing wind, on increasing solar, but that's not going to be enough. We're actually going to have to go cross-sector to decrease our carbon usage. So 61 sets statewide carbon reduction goals. It's been used as a national model for other states to pass, and that means we have to reduce carbon emissions in our transportation. That means converting to electric vehicles. It means reducing traffic, more public transit. It's reducing carbon in our built environment. Our buildings emit a huge amount of carbon. And how are we going to tackle that? How are we going to do energy efficiency? I passed the energy efficiency standard bill in Colorado as a lobbyist, actually, before I went to the legislature, and I worked for Conservation Colorado. I worked on Clean Air and Clean Jobs bill, which shut down 3 of our coal-fired power plants. I also have worked on recycling bills. And so a lot of people, Colorado has some of the lowest diversion rates in the country, which is remarkably weird considering the environmental ethic that most Coloradans have. And that also creates climate change. And so working on recycling bills, I've run a couple community solar bills, making sure that everyone has access to solar, and we're expanding the use of solar. So it's not just Xcel Energy that can provide solar, but individual people, if you live in an apartment or you live in a house with a large tree or you live in a house that's not facing the right way for solar, that you can purchase solar through a community garden. And so we've done a lot. When I was on city council, I was city in the state, meaning that it was easier for our residents than elsewhere to get solar and more affordable. But we haven't done enough. We still have a lot of forest fires. We still see climate change impacts every single day. And in Colorado, that means impacting our tourism industry, impacting our agricultural industry. My daughter, who is 9, runs cross country, and her season was actually canceled this year, not because of COVID, but because the air quality was so bad from the forest fires that it wasn't safe for children to be out running with their developing lungs. That's a clear impact of climate change. And we have to take action now. And we've passed a lot of legislation, but the work continues.
Wow, that's terrific. I don't know if you know, but we do have fires very, very close to Redlands. In Redlands, it's very smoky and ash has been raining down now. And some of my students have been displaced and living in Mountain Home and some other places that are up towards the mountains and Forest Falls. So yes, it's so real.
Yeah, it's awful. You know, it was in one of my early memories of Redlands was actually that you couldn't often see the mountains because of the smog. I played tennis, and the other side of the court was often, I remember the day it would snow or rain was when the school took all the pictures, right? When it was clear. And it was such a stark reality of what's actually happening versus and what we can do about it.
Well, in talking about how we have to change and control our emissions, you might be happy if you came back to see the environmental studies building on campus. I don't know if you know anything about it, but we're not in Duke Hall anymore on one floor. We've got our own building, and it's earth sheltered. It's half underground and has a grate on top of it. Some students call it the hibachi. It kind of looks like a hibachi grill. And if we ever get an earthquake, oh yeah, have you? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you should have come inside. It's really beautiful in there and a lot of natural light, and it's all solar powered for electricity. The panels aren't on Lewis, they're on top of Appleton Hall. And yeah, so too bad you can't come back and do it all over again, be in the environmentally the LEED building.
Exactly, yes.
That's great. Well, tell us a little bit. What do you remember at Redlands that the students might relate to? What were your favorite classes or professors? Or
Sure.
yeah.
Well, obviously, I remember you. You were a fantastic professor. And at the time, Monty was head at the Environmental Sciences Department, and taking classes from him, you always felt inspired. And then I remember I was also a biology minor. And so I love Dr. Malcolm's classes. I thought they were incredible. His work with African wild dogs really inspired me to look at conservation biology. And I remember oftentimes biology classes were full of all these pre-med students. And so I hung out with all these pre-med students. And I remember this one time we had to write a paper about microorganisms or something. And I found a microorganism that could eat plastic. And I wrote my whole paper about how this could be the future of getting rid of plastic. And they were all writing about microorganisms that impacted your health. My paper was definitely the outlier. And I remember my group of friends and we were very proud of ourselves that we could go to either the frat parties or the Johnston parties. And we were welcome at both. So I had a fantastic group of friends. I was also part of the Yeoman organization, and my sophomore year, we collected enough Thanksgiving dinners. So we had all the frats, all the sororities, Johnston, all the dorms donate one specific thing, and the grocery stores donated turkeys, and it was hundreds of Thanksgiving dinners that we were able to donate. So I was involved in that. And then obviously the most important thing is I don't know what Cuca's does to its salsa, but Cuca's, I miss Cuca's, and anytime anyone I know goes near Redlands, I have them buy just so much Cuca's salsa and like get it to me in some sort of way. So if anyone wants to send me Cuca's salsa, I'd be very happy.
I'll have to do that. I'll run out and do it. I'll need your address. Kuka's is still a favorite, that's for sure. Every time I go there, I see students there. So, yeah. Oh, that's great. And I love your paper in biology. Yes, that's kind of still the same. Most bio majors are headed into the health sciences, not all med school, but we do have some EVST students over there taking things again from Dr. Malcolm. And now we have a marine biologist, Leilani Stell, who's quite popular with our EVST majors. So
that's great.
Yeah, great memories. I can imagine the Johnston parties and the frat parties might have been a little bit different.
They're very different, but we like both. One of the Johnston parties was to dress up as your favorite superhero, and I dressed up as a Care Bear, which was a great hit. But I loved the Care Bears growing up, and I think it's one of the reasons I became an organizer, because the Care Bears all come together and do the Care Bear stare together, right? And it's like the tenet of organizing.
That's so awesome. Well, let's see. Tell us a little bit about VoteRunLead. I don't know that.
So VoteRunLead is one of my other jobs right now. So when I'm not being a senator, I do contract work through my own business, and I do both environmental consulting and also training folks to run for office with VoteRunLead. And we are a national nonpartisan organization that trains women to run for office. Before COVID, we trained online and in person. Right now, we're all online. And we actually have a training coming up this Saturday, if anyone wants to check it out. So how do we get out the vote during the coronavirus? How do we make sure that we're turning everyone out? How do we do election protection? What's the best messages for get out the vote? How do you create a field plan? So that's this Saturday. It's at 11 a.m. California time, noon my time. It's free. We train women to run for free. 60% of the women we train are women of color. And we've elected thousands of women all over the country. And we're really excited about this cycle because more women are running for office than any other time in U.S. history. And I think it's very interesting. So you look, the U.S. is, I think we're 78th in the world for electing women. We change, so it's between 72 and 92 usually. But we're not the best, right? We're not that great at electing women. Places like Kuwait are better than we are. The number one country in the world for electing women is Rwanda. And you often look at the countries that have elected a lot of women, it's usually after some pretty devastating stuff happened, where the country went through a crisis and realized that they needed new leadership. They needed to try things in a different way. These are my, personal opinions, but I think we're in a crisis right now as a country. We're in a crisis of coronavirus. We're in a crisis of climate change. We're in the crisis of climate justice. And now is the time to try something new. Now is the time to give women and young folks and people of color and LGBTQ folks a seat at the table. And so we'll see what this election brings, but more women are running than ever before in history.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I'll echo your sentiments there. Yeah, I've got a question in the chat that says, how is the initiative on reintroducing wolves to Colorado doing for the November vote?
I actually have not seen polling on that. And I am working on some ballot initiatives, but I've not seen polling on the wolves initiative. Both sides are not funded. So there's not a huge campaign on this. It's essentially between the folks that really want an introduction to wolves versus ranchers, and it's somewhat of a huge fight there. But we do have wolves coming back to Colorado already. And I think between our BLM management plans and our state forest management plans, we're going to continue to see wolves here. Either way, I think it's just more on the rate of how fast it happens. And so I think this is one of the I've worked in politics for a long time, and usually there's a lot of polling, well-funded proponents, and this is just kind of something that got on the ballot, and we'll see what plays in it.
Huh. Very interesting. Okay, I have another question in the chat. Do you have a word of advice to environmental students about how to affect change after graduation?
I mean, it's completely biased, and we need all the researchers, we need all the scientists, but I very strongly believe we need more elected scientists. And so our democracy works best when we actually have a whole array of people that are elected. I've never been a teacher. Well, I'm doing remote learning with my kids now, and that does not count, and it's really hard. But I've never been a teacher, and so when I'm looking at education policy, I really rely on my fellow legislators that were teachers. I've never been a nurse, so we have one nurse and one doctor in the Colorado legislature, and we really rely on them for healthcare, but we don't have enough scientists elected to office because we have a unique ability and skill set to actually read reports and understand statistics, understand what is scientifically proven and what's hyperbole, and being able to dive into that data. And, I feel strongly that having the policy behind any scientific research is more and more important every single day. When we look at the conversations around immunizations, around climate change, around the response to the coronavirus, I wish more of my colleagues were scientists and could look at that data in the way that a scientist has been trained to do. Now, if you don't want to run for office, that's a big ask, I get it, but consider yourself officially asked to run for office. Right? It's really important to take part in democracy. It's messy, and so many people feel like it's really nasty and awful and gross. don't think of democracy just as the national TV commercials you see. Because when we talk about Denise Davis on Redlands City Council, or we talk about your state legislature, you talk about me, one, we're really accessible. Generally, it's not as partisan, and there's fights, but we do it in a respectful way. And we need you. We need you to weigh in. We need you to weigh in on what we should be doing on climate, on the way that we have the biggest impact on reducing carbon, on the way that we should be reintroducing wolves. And so get involved, get to know your local elected. Promise politics is not as awful and nasty as plays out on your TV. And it can actually be a really positive experience.
That's great. So there's a plug to all of you. Run for office when you get out of school.
I want more scientists in office.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'll take, these questions in the chat are really wonderful. Go ahead and submit a couple more. We're kind of running out of time, but yeah. What kind of environmental consulting do you do?
I work with 4 environmental nonprofits doing organizing work when I'm not in session. Right now I'm working with local electeds on implementing climate plans in their cities, or getting our state to implement our climate plan. Also working with some residents impacted by oil and gas development and helping train them how to tell their stories, because truly stories change hearts and minds. And I think that is, academically trained as a scientist, I believe in facts and data and research, but then being an organizer, and one of the tenets of organizing is you start with where people are at. When you're starting with where people are at, you have to acknowledge where they are, you have to acknowledge their pain points, and you have to bond over stories, because people can disagree with you on a fact, unfortunately, this day and age in our country, but they can't disagree with your experience and the story you have that you bring to the table. So a lot of what I do in both training folks to run for office, training people to govern, and training people to participate in democracy is teaching how to tell a story, which can be really scary because you have to be vulnerable to tell a story. You have to open yourself up, but it's truly the stories that change hearts and minds. Since I'm working with residents that have been impacted by oil and gas development, to tell their stories and talk about their children having nosebleeds because they're close to an oil and gas patch. Talk about the headaches they have, talk about the noise that they experience, the smells they experience, because that's really important when we're voting on oil and gas legislation.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. Are there other things that we didn't cover?
I don't think so. Just that, I would just say, don't ignore politics. Unfortunately, in fact, it impacts everything you do. So if you're environmental management major, it impacts whether we protect the climate. If you're a women's studies major, it impacts the rights that women have. In just your regular life, it impacts your traffic patterns. It impacts where you can shop. It impacts your daily life every single day. And, if we only had political science majors and lawyers in elected office, we wouldn't have the solutions we need. So get involved in one way or another, and let your voice be heard.
That's great. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I give extra credit in my classes if people register and then vote. A lot of people, first-time voters, forget to register. So I try to get them to register and give them 5 points for that, and then 5 points for voting. So
that's great.
Yeah.
We have automatic voter registration in Colorado, so
that's so great.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I can't believe we only overlapped by a year, because I remember you like it was yesterday. And
I know, it doesn't seem that long ago.
I know. I remember your thesis and Endangered Species Act. I mean, it's still a raging controversy whether or not we should even have it. And I teach a lot about it in my biodiversity class still. So it's just really been a pleasure, Faith. And good luck in November. I can't wait to vote. And I just really hope you stay in there and fight the good fight. And yeah, it's been great.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, you know, to all the Redlands students and alum out there, it's a fantastic place and definitely gave me the foundation I needed to be where I am today.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. It's really nice to see you.